They locked the door on her while she was still begging them to open it. That was the part Caleb Walker would remember later. Not the alarms, not the smoke, not the six-armed figures moving down the service corridor, but the sound of Ambassador Lyra Voss pressing one shaking hand against the sealed security glass while her own people left her on the wrong side of it. The emergency lights blinked red across her silver-blue face, turning every breath she took into a flicker of fear and disbelief. 20 feet away, Caleb stood between her and the end of the hall with a torn black suit jacket, a broken earpiece, and one hand pressed tight against his left shoulder. He did not look heroic. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had already done the math and hated the answer. Outside the busted door, the attackers slowed when they saw him. They had expected a diplomat, maybe a frightened aide, maybe a soft human guard who would drop his weapon and start making promises. Caleb did none of that. He checked the hallway mirror, counted their shadows, and spoke over his shoulder without raising his voice. "Ambassador, can you walk?" Lyra swallowed hard. Her ceremonial robe was caught on a jagged strip of wall paneling, and her knees wanted to fold under her. 3 hours ago, she had been standing in the grand hall of Aurelia Station, smiling for cameras, telling half the quadrant that trust was the first step toward peace. Now trust had a locked door, a silent comm channel, and the backs of her royal security team disappearing toward the shuttle bay. "I think so," she whispered. Caleb gave a small nod, like that was all he needed. "Then save your breath." One of the attackers called out in a clicking language that the translator barely caught. "Step aside, human. This is not your treaty." Caleb's eyes stayed on the reflection in the mirror. "Funny," he said. "I was hired to stand here. You were hired to guard a room." "No," Caleb said, shifting his weight just enough to block the line of sight to Lyra. "I was hired to guard her." Lyra stared at the back of him. She had chosen Caleb Walker because he had seemed safe in the most boring way possible. Quiet, polite, American in that plain, steady way she had been told to expect from humans who worked security contracts. He drank coffee too strong, asked for floor plans, and said ma'am like it was stitched into his bones. He had never once mentioned Earth. Not at dinner. Not during briefings. Not when her advisors joked that humans from colony worlds were easier to manage than the old bloodlines from Sol. But now the attackers had stopped smiling. Their leader lifted a scanner, and for the first time since the lights went out, fear moved in the other direction. The device chirped once. A name appeared. Caleb Walker. Birthplace, Earth. The leader took one step back. Lyra heard it then, the change in the room, the tiny collapse of confidence. Caleb heard it too. He reached behind him, pushed the emergency release into Lyra's palm, and said, "When I tell you to move, you move." She looked at the scanner, then at him. "Why are they afraid of you?" Caleb did not answer right away. He only watched the corridor, calm as a locked door. "Because somebody told them what Earth means," he said. And for once, they listened. 24 hours before Lyra Voss found herself trapped behind a security door with her own guards running the other way. She sat in a clean white briefing room above Aurelia Station and chose Caleb Walker from a list of names nobody wanted her to pick. The room looked more like a luxury hotel lounge than a military office, with soft gold lighting, quiet air vents, and a view of the planet turning slowly beneath the glass floor. Her advisors had given her 12 approved human security candidates, each one polished for diplomacy. Former naval officers with perfect smiles. Embassy protection specialists with spotless records. One tall man from New Boston Colony who spoke 5 trade languages and had been described as emotionally compatible with Seraphine etiquette. Caleb was listed near the bottom. His profile photo was plain, almost awkward. Brown hair cut short, pale skin, gray eyes, no smile. 37 years old. Private security contractor. Previous Terran military service mostly sealed. Birth records restricted. Psychological review marked stable but difficult to read. Lyra tapped his name once. Her chief advisor, Marek, made a soft sound of polite concern. "Ambassador, I would not recommend that one." Lyra looked up. "Why?" Marek shifted in his chair. "He is not polished." "That is not an answer. He has an old Earth file." The way he said Earth made the room feel colder, even with the artificial sun lamps glowing above them. Lyra had heard that tone before. Earth was useful when its trade lanes needed defending, charming when its music filled reception halls, brave when its soldiers stood far away from important people. But in rooms like this, among diplomats with clean hands and long memories, Earth became something else. A word people lowered their voices around. Lyra studied Caleb's profile again. There were no medals displayed, no heroic summary, no grand statement about honor. Just a service record with half the lines hidden behind black clearance bars and a note from a previous embassy. Does not overreact under pressure. Bring him in, she said. 10 minutes later, Caleb Walker entered with a paper coffee cup in one hand and a cheap black folder in the other. He was not the tallest human in the station. He was not the strongest looking. His suit fit well enough, but it had the stiff shoulders of something bought for work, not admiration. He stopped 2 steps inside the room, noticed every exit without turning his head, and gave Lyra a small nod. Ambassador. No bow. No dramatic salute. No attempt to impress her. Marek frowned immediately. Lyra found herself almost smiling. Mr. Walker, everyone else has told me why they are qualified to protect me. Are you going to do the same? Caleb took 1 second too long to answer. Not because he was slow, because he was deciding how honest to be. No, ma'am. No. You already have my file. If the file did not help, me bragging will not fix it. One of her aides blinked like the translation software had made a mistake. Lyra leaned back in her chair. Then what do you need from me? Caleb set the folder on the table, opened it, and slid out a printed floor plan of Aurelia Station's diplomatic wing. It had red circles around service corridors, maintenance elevators, emergency airlock controls, and 3 blind spots in the surveillance grid. Marek sat forward. Where did you get that? Caleb did not look at him. Public contractor database. Badly organized, not secured. Lyra's smile faded. Caleb pointed to the hall outside the grand chamber. I need your exact walking route, names of everyone allowed within 10 feet of you, medical restrictions, allergy list, and whether your ceremonial robe can be cut loose in an emergency. The room went quiet. Lyra looked down at her silver blue sleeves, embroidered by 6 generations of her family. That robe is a symbol of my office. Yes, ma'am, Caleb said. Can it be cut loose? It was the first time that day anyone had spoken to her, as if she was not a symbol, not a treaty, not a political instrument, but a living person who might need to run. She folded her hands on the table. If my life depends on it, yes. Caleb nodded once and wrote it down with a pen. An actual pen. Good. Marek looked offended. Ambassador, this is unnecessary. Seraphine shields have never failed inside a diplomatic station. Caleb looked at the advisor then. Not rude, not angry, just tired in a way Lyra did not yet understand. That is usually when things fail. Lyra watched him cap the pen and realized something small but important. Every other candidate had promised safety. Caleb had planned for danger. She did not know yet that by the next night, that difference would be the only reason she was still breathing. Aurelia Station did not look like a place where anyone would plan a betrayal. That was what bothered Caleb first. Dangerous rooms usually announced themselves in small, honest ways. Bad lighting, cheap locks, nervous staff, doors that stuck when they should not. Aurelia was the opposite. It was too clean, too polished, too proud of itself. The diplomatic wing curved around a suspended garden where silver trees floated in low gravity, their leaves drifting in slow circles beneath a glass ceiling filled with manufactured stars. The floors were black crystal. The walls glowed with soft, bioluminescent patterns that shifted whenever Lyra passed, as if the station itself wanted to bow. Every attendant smiled. Every guard stood perfectly straight. Every official said the right thing at the right time, and Caleb hated it. He walked 3 steps behind Lyra, close enough to reach her, far enough not to offend Seraphine protocol. Captain Veyron noticed anyway. The Seraphine security chief was nearly 7 feet tall, broad-shouldered, silver-skinned, and wrapped in white armor that looked more ceremonial than useful. He glanced down at Caleb's plain black suit and the compact human sidearm under his jacket. You scan the walls as if they might attack us, Mr. Walker. Caleb kept his eyes moving. Walls do what people tell them to do. Veyron gave a dry laugh. That is a very human answer. Usually the only kind I have. Lyra heard the exchange and looked back, but Caleb was already watching a maintenance worker near the west arch. The worker had paused beside a decorative pillar for half a second too long. Not enough for anyone polite to mention. Enough for Caleb to mark him in his head. A few minutes later, the party entered the Hall of Accord, where the treaty signing would take place the next evening. It was beautiful in a way that felt expensive on purpose. A raised platform stood in the center. Above it, a ring of cameras waited like patient insects. There were 8 visible exits, 2 service doors, 1 press balcony, and a ceiling high enough to hide problems. Caleb looked for boring details, because boring details saved lives. A camera over the south entrance was angled 3 inches low. One emergency panel had fresh polish around the edges, as if someone had opened it and wiped it down. The service door behind the speaker platform had a status light that blinked green, but the lock housing was warm. He stepped closer, touched the metal with the back of his fingers, and frowned. "Is there an issue?" Lyra asked softly. Caleb did not answer right away. He looked at the ceiling, then the floor, then the position of Veyron's guards. "Maybe." Veyron sighed. "Our systems are inspected every 6 hours. Aurelia Station is protected by Seraphine Shield architecture, Concord law, and council neutrality." Caleb looked at him. "That is a lot of things to trust." "And you trust what exactly?" Caleb tapped the service door once. "Bad hinges. Fresh fingerprints. People who smile too much." One of Veyron's guards made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Humans see danger in every shadow." Caleb turned his head just enough to meet his eyes. "Only the ones that move." Lyra should have found that rude. Instead, she found herself watching the guard who had laughed. His smile faded before anyone else noticed. Later, during the reception, Caleb stood near a marble column while Lyra spoke with trade ministers, military envoys, and soft-voiced nobles who praised peace as long as it cost them nothing. He accepted 1 cup of coffee from a human catering vendor, did not drink it, and set it on a nearby tray after the vendor walked away. Marek saw him do it. "Now the coffee is suspicious?" Caleb glanced at the cup. The vendor had station shoes and kitchen hands. Meaning he walked like security and carried the tray like he had never served drinks in his life. Marek's expression tightened. "You are making accusations." "No, I am making notes." Across the room, Lyra caught Caleb's eye. For the first time, she did not see a quiet employee. She saw a man trying to hear a storm before anyone else felt the rain. Then Captain Veyron received a private message, read it, and looked away too quickly. Caleb saw that too. He saw the shift change come 15 minutes early. He saw 2 Seraphine guards leave the inner ring without replacements. He saw the service door behind the stage blink from green to amber, then back again. When he reported it, Veyron only smiled. "Relax, Mr. Walker. Tomorrow is a ceremony, not a battlefield." Caleb looked at the empty platform where Lyra would stand in less than 24 hours and felt something old and cold settle behind his ribs. That is what people usually say before both. The betrayal did not come with shouting, or alarms, or anyone brave enough to call it betrayal. It came on a clean white tablet in Captain Veyron's hand, wrapped in polite language and stamped with the seal of Seraphine Internal Security. Caleb read the change order once, then read it again, because old habits made him check whether the knife had a handle. The ceremony was less than an hour away. Lyra stood near the private preparation room mirror while 2 attendants adjusted the silver trim of her formal robe. Beyond the glass, Aurelia Station glittered like nothing bad had ever happened there. Veyron cleared his throat with the soft confidence of a man who believed authority could make bad decisions look respectable. "Mr. Walker, your position has been reassigned to the outer observation ring." Caleb folded the tablet shut. "That puts me 80 feet from the ambassador." 83, Veyron said. "The inner ring will be handled by Seraphine personnel." Marek looked relieved. The attendants pretended not to listen. Lyra turned slowly. "I chose Mr. Walker for close protection." Veyron bowed just enough to be insulting without being rude. "And your judgment is respected, Ambassador. But the final ceremony falls under Concord jurisdiction. Human contractors are not permitted within the first security circle during a treaty signing." Caleb looked at the door behind Veyron, then at the 2 guards posted beside it. Both were new. Both avoided his eyes. That rule changed since yesterday. Veyron's smile stayed in place. "The clarification arrived this morning." "Clarifications do that," Caleb said. "Show up right when they are useful." Lyra heard the flatness in his voice and felt the room tighten around her. She wanted to ask him what he saw, but she already knew enough to be afraid of the answer. Caleb did not argue. That frightened her more than if he had. He simply stepped closer to the table, took the ceremony route map, and marked 3 small dots with his pen. "Ambassador, When you reach the platform, stand 2 feet left of the center mark. Marek frowned. That would ruin the camera alignment. Good. Caleb circled a service alcove near the west wall. Keep your left hand free. Do not let anyone fasten the lower clasp on your robe. If you need to move, cloth gets people killed faster than fear. One attendant gasped softly. Lyra lifted one hand, silencing her. Caleb continued like he was reading a grocery list. If the lights cut out, do not stand up to look for me. Get low. If your translator fails, do not wait for words. Watch my hands. Veyron stepped forward. This is unnecessary and highly inappropriate. Caleb finally looked at him. Then you will have no trouble ignoring it. For one sharp second, Veyron's expression slipped. Not much. Just enough. Under the polished pride, there was irritation, and under that, something Caleb recognized from 100 bad rooms back home. Not guilt exactly. Pressure. A man following orders he did not want written down. Lyra saw Caleb notice it. She also saw him decide not to speak. That was the worst part. Everyone in the room was still being civilized, still using titles, still pretending this was protocol. But the truth had already walked in and sat down among them. Someone wanted Caleb away from her. Someone inside her own system had made that possible. Caleb closed the folder and handed it to Lyra. Their fingers touched for half a second. His hand was warm, steady, human. Ma'am, he said quietly. You need to listen very carefully now. Her throat tightened. I am listening. When people move me away from the person I am protecting, I assume they are not worried about manners. Marek stared at him. What are you implying? Caleb did not look away from Lyra. I am implying the ambassador should stop trusting the room. A chime sounded overhead, soft and musical, announcing that the treaty hall was ready. The doors opened. Applause drifted in from the grand chamber, warm and bright, and completely wrong. Lyra lifted her chin because diplomats were trained to walk toward rooms that scared them. Caleb stepped aside because protocol had ordered him to. But as she passed, he spoke barely above a whisper. 2 feet left. Left hand free. Lyra did not nod. She only walked forward with her robe unclasped at the bottom, her heart beating too hard beneath all that silver, while Caleb followed 83 feet behind her, watching every shadow that moved. The grand chamber greeted Lyra like a dream built by people who had never been afraid. Thousands of soft lights floated above the Hall of Accord, each one holding a tiny recording drone inside its glow. Delegates from 12 systems rose as she entered, their robes and armor shimmering beneath the glass ceiling. The platform waited at the center of the room, bright, perfect, and exposed. Lyra heard the applause, felt the weight of history pressing against her shoulders, and kept walking. 2 feet left, Caleb had said. Left hand free. So when she reached the polished center mark, she did not stand on it. She shifted left just enough to make the camera drones quietly correct their angle. Across the room, Caleb saw it and let out one slow breath. He was trapped behind the outer observation rail with tourists, junior aides, and 3 Seraphine guards who were pretending not to watch him. His earpiece had gone scratchy 5 minutes earlier. Not dead. Not broken. Dirty. Someone had filled the channel with soft static, the kind that sounded like bad equipment if you wanted it to. Caleb touched 2 fingers to the side of his jaw. Walker to inner ring. Radio check. Nothing answered but a thin hiss. On the platform, Lyra placed both hands on the speaker's rail. Her left hand stayed free. Honored delegates, she began, her voice carrying through the chamber. Today is not the end of our caution. It is the beginning of choosing something better than fear. Caleb watched the service door behind the platform. Green light. Green light. Amber. Back to green. His stomach dropped. Not panic. Recognition. He moved before anyone gave him permission. One of the Seraphine guards stepped in his path. Mr. Walker, return to your assigned position. Caleb did not slow down. Move. You are violating ceremony protocol. Yes. The guard reached for his arm. Caleb turned his shoulder, slipped past him, and started down the aisle. That was when the first light died. Every light in the hall went out at once. Not dimmed. Not flickered. Gone. The floating drones dropped into emergency mode, flashing red as the chamber filled with startled voices. The elegant translator tones dissolved into bursts of broken sound. Seraphine shield bands around the platform sparked once and failed. In the dark, Lyra heard Captain Veyron shout for formation, but the order cracked halfway through, swallowed by static. A sharp pulse struck the speaker's rail where she would have been standing if she had obeyed the center mark. The rail snapped loose and clattered across the platform. For one frozen second, Lyra could not move. Her mind tried to dress the moment in diplomatic words: malfunction, disruption, security incident. Then the second pulse cut through the empty space beside her shoulder, and diplomacy became a very small thing. Caleb reached her before her own inner guard did. He came out of the dark fast and low, one hand catching the loose fabric of her robe, the other guiding her behind the platform wall. "Down," he said. Not loud, not dramatic, just final. Lyra dropped. Around them, dignitaries crawled beneath benches, aides called for help, and Seraphine guards shouted over one another in a language the translator could no longer hold together. Veyron was 30 feet away, frozen between the platform and the east exit, his face lit red by emergency strobes. Caleb looked at him once. West Service alcove. Now. Veyron stared as if taking orders from a human was harder than surviving the room. The ambassador must be extracted by Royal Corridor. Caleb pointed toward the Royal Corridor without looking. Its security door had already sealed from the outside. Through the glass, Lyra saw 2 Seraphine guards backing away, then turning toward the shuttle route. Something inside her went quiet. Veyron saw it too. He touched his comm, listened, and his expression changed from pride to calculation. "The ambassador is compromised," he said. "We preserve the line." Lyra barely recognized his voice. "Captain." He would not meet her eyes. Caleb did. He was breathing hard now, and for the first time she saw fear on his face. Real fear. Controlled fear. Useful fear. "Your people are not coming," he said. Another pulse struck the wall above them, showering the platform with harmless bright fragments. Caleb pulled the lower clasp of her robe loose exactly where he had told her to leave it open. The heavy fabric fell away from her legs. "Can you crawl?" Lyra nodded, because speaking felt impossible. Caleb pushed the emergency release into her palm. "Good. West alcove on my count. Stay low, stay left, and do not stop because somebody important starts yelling." She looked toward the sealed royal door, where the last of her certainty had disappeared. Then she looked at Caleb Walker, 83 feet out of position, standing exactly where he was needed. "Why did they leave me?" she whispered. Caleb glanced at the dark service door, now opening from the inside. "Because they thought saving themselves was the same as surviving." He placed himself between her and the sound of approaching footsteps. "They are about to learn the difference." The west alcove door opened with a sound too soft for the amount of fear behind it. Caleb pulled Lyra through first, then stepped in after her and hit the manual seal with the heel of his hand. The panel flashed red, locked from central security. He stared at it for half a second, then reached under the frame and yanked loose a strip of decorative casing. Lyra watched him pull 2 wires free like he had done it 1,000 times in worse places. "Is that safe?" she asked, her voice thin. "No," Caleb said, "but locked is worse." The door gave a heavy click and sealed behind them. The noise of the grand chamber became a muffled roar, distant and unreal. Ahead was a maintenance corridor that looked nothing like the station brochures. No glass floors, no floating gardens, no polite silver trees, just low ceilings, gray wall panels, exposed coolant pipes, and narrow yellow floor lines meant for workers nobody important was supposed to notice. Caleb pointed down the passage. "Move to the bend. Keep one hand on the wall." Lyra tried to stand too quickly, and her legs nearly gave out. Caleb caught her by the elbow, steady but not gentle. "Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast." She almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because her mind needed something normal, and there was nothing normal left. Is that a human proverb? Something like that. They reached the bend, and Caleb guided her behind a utility cart stacked with filter canisters. He crouched in front of her and opened the small medical pouch from inside his jacket. Only then did she notice the dark stain spreading across his left shoulder. "You are hurt," she said. "I noticed. You should treat yourself first." "I am not the treaty." He tore open a sterile patch with his teeth, then paused, took it out of his mouth, and gave her a quick look. "Sorry. Bad field habit." Under any other circumstance, Lyra would have found that strangely endearing. In that corridor, it made him feel more real. Not a legend. Not a weapon. A tired man with a cut on his face, dirty hands, and a job he had no intention of abandoning. He checked a shallow scrape along her side where the edge of the platform had caught her. This will sting. I am a diplomat, Mr. Walker. I have survived budget hearings. He pressed the patch into place. Lyra sucked in a sharp breath. Budget hearings are easier, she whispered. Depends on the committee. The small joke did more for her than the medicine. It reminded her that the world had not ended yet. Caleb glanced back toward the sealed door. The footsteps outside had not reached them, but the station carried sound through its bones. Somewhere above, people were still shouting. Somewhere behind them, someone was using official channels to decide whether her life was worth the inconvenience. Caleb pulled a compact flashlight from his belt and clipped it to the card, aiming the beam low so it would not spill into the hall. Then he removed his jacket, folded it around his injured shoulder, and tightened it with a strip of fabric from her discarded robe. His hands were steady, but Lyra saw the tiny twitch in his jaw. "You are afraid," she said. Caleb looked at her, and for once, he did not hide behind dry humor. "Yes, ma'am." The honesty hit harder than any reassurance could have. Her own guards had shouted about honor while backing away. Caleb admitted fear while moving closer to danger. "Then how are you still thinking?" she asked. He checked the small number of rounds left in his sidearm, then picked up a wrench from the utility cart and weighed it in his palm. Fear is information. Panic is what happens when you stop reading it. Lyra looked down at her hands. They were shaking so badly she had to press them together. "I think I am panicking." "That is fine." "It does not feel fine. It is your first time being abandoned during a treaty signing. You are allowed to be bad at it." She stared at him, then let out one broken breath that almost became a laugh. Caleb gave her that same small nod from the briefing room. Approval without softness. Comfort without lying. He pulled the service map from his folder, now creased and smudged, and spread it across the floor between them. "There is a cargo lift 200 feet down this corridor. If it still has power, it takes us below the diplomatic wing. If it does not, we use the ladder shaft." Lyra looked at the map, then back toward the sealed door. "And if they are waiting there?" Caleb picked up the wrench, the flashlight catching the calm in his eyes. "Then we make them wish they had taken the stairs." A heavy knock echoed from the door behind them. Not random. Testing. Caleb turned off the flashlight. The corridor went dark except for the red emergency strip along the floor. He leaned close enough for Lyra to hear him breathe. "From now on, no titles," he whispered. "No speeches. No arguing with people who already decided you do not matter." The second knock came harder. Lyra forced herself to stand. Her knees shook, but they held. Caleb saw it and moved ahead of her into the dark. "Good," he said quietly. "Now we start disappointing them." The third knock did not come. That was worse. Caleb knew the rhythm of people trying to scare someone, and he knew the rhythm of people who had stopped performing and started working. On the other side of the sealed door, the attackers had gone quiet. He motioned Lyra forward with 2 fingers, and they moved down the maintenance corridor under the thin red emergency glow, stepping over cable bundles and low pipes, while the whole station seemed to hold its breath around them. The cargo lift was 200 feet away, just like the map said, but distance changed when people were hunting you. Every foot felt longer. Every turn felt borrowed. Lyra kept one hand on the wall and one hand pressed against the patch at her side. She wanted to ask how much farther. She did not. Caleb had told her no titles, no speeches, no wasted air, and for the first time in her life, the rules that mattered were not written by a council. They reached a split in the corridor where 3 service tunnels met under a blinking sign that read cargo access in plain English, Seraphine script, and 2 trade languages. Caleb stopped, so suddenly Lyra nearly walked into him. He raised one hand. Somewhere ahead, a boot scraped metal. Not loud, not careless, just enough. Caleb looked at a loose pressure valve above them, then at a row of empty filter drums beside the wall. "Behind those," he whispered. Lyra crouched low, her robe trimmed down to torn silver cloth and practical movement, while Caleb stepped into the open with the wrench hanging loose at his side. 2 attackers emerged from the cross hall. Their armor was matte gray, not military issue, not cheap either. Professionals. One carried a scanner. The other lifted a compact pulse weapon and tilted his head as the translator on his collar sparked back to life. "Human contractor," he said. "This does not concern you." Caleb looked genuinely tired of hearing that. "People keep saying that in rooms where I am standing. Walk away." "No, you do not know who hired us." Caleb shifted half a step, placing his body between them and the filter drums. I know they paid extra for inside door codes. I know they jammed the translators, but left station cameras alive. I know they want her frightened on a live feed, not just gone. That means politics. Politics means witnesses. Witnesses mean you are on a schedule. The attacker with the scanner hesitated. Lyra could see it from behind the drums, that small break in confidence when a target started explaining the trap back to the trapper. The scanner chirped. A blue line swept Caleb from head to toe. The alien looked down at the display, then went still. No, he said, almost too softly for the translator to catch. His partner glanced over. What? The scanner trembled in the first attacker's hand. Not colony-born. Caleb's face did not change. The second attacker took one careful step back. Confirm it. Birthplace registry, the first one said. North America. Earth. Sol system. The corridor changed. Nothing moved, and yet everything moved. The weapon aimed at Caleb dipped a fraction of an inch. The breathing inside those helmets slowed and sharpened. The hunters had found a word bigger than their orders. Lyra stared at Caleb's back, suddenly remembering every time someone in a briefing had said Earth like a problem too old to solve. Caleb glanced toward the ceiling as if listening to an old song he did not like. You boys read files? He asked. Neither answered. Then you should have read the part about narrow corridors. He turned the valve above him. A burst of white maintenance steam filled the hallway, not hot enough to harm, but thick enough to blind. Caleb moved through it like he had been waiting for the station to become ugly and useful. There were no grand gestures, no rage, no performance. A shoulder into one man's balance. A hard twist of the wrist. The wrench knocking a weapon loose. The second attacker stumbled back into the filter drums, and Lyra shoved them forward with both hands before fear could talk her out of it. The drums rolled across the floor, loud and clumsy and perfect. Caleb caught her arm as the smoke thinned. Nice, he said. Lyra was breathing too fast. I panicked. No, Caleb said, pulling her toward the cargo lift. You participated. Behind them, one attacker groaned into his calm, voice breaking through the static. Control, we have a problem. The bodyguard is Earthborn. The answer came back after one long second, low and sharp. Then stop chasing the diplomat and contain him. Lyra heard it clearly. They were no longer hunting her. They were afraid of him. The cargo lift was not moving because someone above them had taken control of it and wanted them to know. Caleb pressed the call switch twice, listened to the empty shaft hum, then stepped back from the doors as if the metal itself had just whispered a threat. Lyra watched his face under the red emergency strip. He did not look surprised. That, more than anything, made her stomach tighten. They locked it, she asked. They invited us to wait, Caleb said. That is different. A screen beside the lift flickered on before she could answer. Static rolled across it, then cleared into the sharp, elegant face of High Envoy Dallin Mar, dressed in formal white, as if he were still standing at a reception instead of speaking through a hijacked security feed. His silver eyes settled on Lyra with practiced sorrow. Ambassador Voss, I had hoped you would be spared this much confusion. Lyra stepped closer, anger finally cutting through the fear. Dallin, you did this. I protected our future, he said. You were about to hand Seraphine's sovereignty to a species that should never have been invited into civilized space. Caleb stood to one side of the screen, just out of its camera angle, checking the ceiling panels, the lift seams, the emergency ladder hatch. Dallin saw enough of him to smile, without warmth. And you brought one of them into your confidence. That was your first mistake. Lyra looked at Caleb, then back at the screen. He stayed when my own guard left. Yes, Dallin said softly. That is what makes them dangerous. They make loyalty look simple. They make restraint look moral. But Earth does not produce peace, Lyra. It produces survivors with good manners. Caleb stopped working for half a second. Only half. Dallin continued, his voice growing colder. Do you know what the old reports say? Earth gravity breaks the posture of half the known species. Its weather can tear cities apart. Its oceans hide predators larger than diplomatic shuttles. Its microbes are so aggressive that first contact teams burn their own suits after landing. And the humans? They looked at that world and called it home. Lyra had heard pieces of this in school, always softened, always wrapped in academic distance. Hearing it now, from a traitor using history like a weapon, made it feel ugly. Dallin leaned closer to the camera. They spent thousands of years fighting one another, then walked into the stars pretending they had learned mercy. They have not changed. They have only learned when to smile. Caleb looked up then. Not angry. Worse. Patient. You read the wrong part. Dallon's eyes shifted toward him. Excuse me. Caleb stepped into view. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, his face marked by smoke and dust, but his voice stayed flat. You read the disasters. The wars. The predators. The storms. Everybody does. Makes for a scary briefing. Dallon's mouth tightened. And what part did I miss, Mr. Walker? Caleb took one step closer to the screen. The part where we stopped. The corridor went quiet except for the lift machinery ticking behind the doors. Caleb pointed down the dark hallway, not at Dallon, but past him, as if speaking to every hidden listener in the station. Earth taught us fear early. It taught us hunger, cold, fire, loss, every ugly thing a living creature can learn. And then, after all that, we built hospitals. We wrote laws. We signed treaties. We sent people like me to stand beside people like her, not because we forgot what we are capable of, but because we remember. Lyra felt her chest tighten, not with fear this time, but with the sudden understanding that Caleb had been carrying more than a weapon and a contract. He had been carrying a locked door inside himself, and every minute in that corridor, he had kept choosing not to open it. Dallon stared at him with open disgust. A comforting speech from a hired guard. No, Caleb said. A warning from one. The screen flickered as Dallon sent a command through the station system. Above them, heavy locks disengaged in the ceiling. Somewhere nearby, more footsteps began moving their way. Dallon's face returned to calm. Then let us see how long your restraint lasts. The screen went black. Lyra looked toward the sounds in the corridor, then at Caleb. What do we do? Caleb pulled open the emergency ladder hatch beside the lift and gestured her inside. We do the part Earth got good at. Which part is that? Caleb gave her a tired little smile. We adapt. The ladder shaft smelled like dust, hot metal, and the part of every station no one admitted existed. Lyra climbed first because Caleb made her, one rung at a time, her hands aching, her side burning, the grand language of diplomacy reduced to a simple human instruction whispered from below. 3 more feet. Right hand up. Good. Keep going. Behind them, the cargo lift doors opened to an empty corridor Caleb had never planned to enter. The attackers rushed toward the sound they expected, toward the screen Dallon had used, toward the obvious path. They found Caleb's jacket hanging on a pipe, a flashlight rolling slowly across the floor, and a maintenance alarm set to scream in exactly the wrong direction. By the time they understood, Lyra and Caleb were already above them in a narrow service gallery overlooking the diplomatic wing. Through the grated floor, Lyra could see the hall of Accord below, full of frightened delegates and frozen cameras. The station was still broadcasting. Dallon had wanted witnesses. Caleb had made sure he got them. Can you reach that panel? He asked. Lyra pulled herself to the wall console and wiped dust from the emergency public address switch. This one? Yes. When I say now, open every channel. Below them, Dallonmar stepped onto the damaged platform, calm, clean, and certain the story still belonged to him. Ambassador Voss was reckless, he announced to the chamber. Her faith in Earth endangered us all. For the safety of the Concord, I am assuming emergency authority. Lyra looked at Caleb. He is going to get away with it. Caleb shook his head. No, he is going to explain it. He tapped the panel he had rewired with a strip of copper from the lift controls. Dallon's private command feed burst across every screen in the chamber, every drone, every diplomatic recorder still alive. His own voice filled the room, cold and clear, ordering the doors sealed, the guards withdrawn, the human bodyguard contained. The Hall of Accord went silent in a way Lyra had never heard before. Not polite silence. Not ceremonial silence. Moral silence. The kind that arrives when everyone realizes they have been standing too close to cowardice and calling it order. Dallon turned pale. This is fabricated. Lyra pressed the public address switch. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied. No, High Envoy. It is witnessed. Caleb helped her down the last ladder and into the chamber through a side access door. He was limping now, one hand against the wall, but he still placed himself half a step in front of her without thinking. Dallon saw him and lost the last of his composure. You should have killed him when you had the chance, he snapped at his own men. Caleb looked at the cameras, then at Dallon. That is the difference between us. The first Terran rescue team entered without music, without speeches, without the dramatic thunder other species expected from Earth. Just quiet professionals moving with purpose, guiding civilians out, securing doors, checking the injured, making the room safer one small act at a time. Captain Veyron stood near the royal corridor, stripped of command by the shame on his own face before any court could do it for him. Lyra walked past him. He tried to speak. She did not stop. An hour later, the treaty was signed in a smaller room with bad lighting, folding chairs, and scorch marks on the far wall. Lyra insisted Caleb stand beside her, not behind her. When Marek whispered that some delegates would object to an Earthborn guard in the signing photo, Lyra placed her hand on the document and said, "Then let the photo teach them something." Caleb looked uncomfortable, which made her trust him more. After the final signature, she found him by a window overlooking the planet below. "Why did you never tell me," she asked, "that you were from Earth?" Caleb watched the sunrise crawl over the curve of the world. "Most people stop seeing me after that. They see the reports, the old wars, the gravity, the warnings." Lyra stood beside him. "I saw a man who was afraid and stayed anyway." He did not answer for a while. Then he said, "That is all courage is, most days." Lyra looked back at the treaty, at the shaken delegates, at the guards who had learned that armor was not the same thing as loyalty. She understood then that peace was not fragile because enemies hated it. Peace was fragile because good people often expected someone else to protect it. Caleb Walker had not saved her because he was fearless. He had saved her because, somewhere on a harsh blue planet called Earth, his people had learned that restraint means nothing unless it holds when running would be easier. And from that day forward, when the galaxy spoke of Earth, Lyra made sure they did not only remember what humans had survived. She made sure they remembered what one human had chosen not to become.